Good morning. I appreciate you bearing with me as we try something new today. Hopefully this will go well. This is recording today instead of being live. If things go as planned, I should have just greeted you live and said hello and talked to you for a little bit, had a word of prayer. And I'm going to turn it over to some worship and then I'll preach. And then we'll be back in a little bit, tomorrow actually at about 10 o'clock. So if you want to put us on the largest screen in your house, that'll be great. I know I'm not much to look at, but it'll kind of help us tune into worship. Get up, get ready, get a cup of coffee, get dressed, make sure you're alert. We want to tune into this as much as we can to what God has for you, and that's my prayer that He'll join with us as we worship today. This one's called At Calvary. If you want to look up the lyrics, it's similar to the old hymn. You might know it. It just seems as I was picking these songs out this week, there was a lot of new versions of hymns and some old versions of hymns with some different guitar tunings. So I hope that some of these hymns are familiar to you, and some of the newer versions we've been doing for a while. So I pray that they encourage you today. Born of a virgin, was among men. nations, stretched out on a tree, took the nails for me. Living, He loved me. Dying, He saved me. Buried, He carried my sins far away. Rising, He justified. Freely forever. One day He's coming. Oh, glorious day. Oh, glorious day. One day the grave could seal Him no longer. One day the stone rolled away from the door. Then He arose, oh, death He had conquered. Now is ascended, my Lord evermore. Death could not hold Him, grave could not keep Him, rising again. Living, He loved me. Dying, He saved me. Buried, He carried my sins far away. Rising, He justified. Freely forever. One day He's coming. Oh, glorious day. Glorious day. Glorious day. One day the trumpet will sound for His coming. One day the skies with His glories will shine. Wonderful day, my beloved will bring. My Savior Jesus is mine. Living, He loved me. Dying, He saved me. Buried, He carried my sins far away. Rising, He justified. Freely forever. One day He's coming. Glorious day. Glorious day. Glorious day. Glorious day. I think the reason I like that song is it just tells the story of Christ's life. I like all the songs that do that, really. But I think that's the reason why I particularly like that one. I had started, as my congregation knows, about a month ago I went on a sabbatical right when all this stuff with this virus started, and things were really starting to pick up as far as isolation. And I had made a note in my notes. It was the week that we went from being slightly alarmed to being really, really cautious about that, and anticipated this thing was going to be bigger than we had originally anticipated. And I had written in my notes, right when all this was going down, after Easter, question mark, churches open again. Well, we're now after Easter. This is the Sunday after Easter, and churches are still not open. And there was some talk on Friday that about easing of restrictions, but we still don't really know what that's going to look like. And I want to tie that to another thing I had written to in a board report to my board, that I really felt that God was telling me that we need to simplify what we do. And in one way, yes, that's true. And in another way, we haven't really, because I had to get up to speed on all this technology and stuff like that. But I really just thought the church was just incredibly complex. All the pieces, the moving pieces that had to work together, and thought God was telling me to simplify things. And what is really simple for us is what helps us to simplify is to remember what's important about the church, and that's our relationships with each other. It shouldn't be about the quality of everything we do, but it's more about God's people being faithful to what He's called us to do. So what is simple is for us to chat face to face, as we did a few moments ago, rather than me trying to arrange and record and produce something that's aesthetically pleasing 3 or 4 times a week. And that's the simple version of it. That doesn't mean I'm not going to do the Facebook Lives every day like we've been doing. But I've tried to simplify it a little bit. I'm still trying to improve things, find out what is a way that my routine changes and schedule changes so that we can worship together and have at least a little bit of quality to what we do. And for example, hopefully today that our worship time's a little better. I know we've had some audio-video problems before. But we can always talk about one of your favorite songs, and mine as well, about how great is God's faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever wilt be. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth, thy own dear presence to cheer and to guide, strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow, blessings all mine with 10,000 beside. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Well, I'm going to do one more as we close today, but I want us to open the Word first this morning. But before we do that, let's have a word of prayer. I trust that you've been praying in your own homes. I've been coming to you from my prayer chair this week. So let's pray. Father, we thank you for this time this morning with your people. Pray that it's a blessing and encouragement to them that we worship you, whether it's live, whether it's recorded, whether it's face-to-face in person. We know that you are the witness of all of that, and we just give you the honor and glory. We sing, great is your faithfulness. We tell your story. Pray that as we open your word this morning, you open our hearts as well. Let us hear what you have to say. May you be glorified in Christ's name. Amen. I want to preach a story today from Luke chapter 24. It's a story that has always been fascinating to me. And as I read through it, it's really hard to find a bunch of jumping off points, because it's just an interesting story. For me, it raised a lot of questions, but it's a story about hesitation and wondering, and then finally awakening, a realization, an affirmation. So if you have a Bible, you open it to Luke chapter 24. I'm going to read the passage to us first, and then we'll kind of work our way back through it. As far as I know, I've never preached on this passage, but like I said, I really wanted to dig into it, and it's I kind of think of it as a post-Easter experience, but it actually happened on the same day of the resurrection, the day when Mary and the other women went to the tomb, and that's really important to remember as we dig into this. A lot of commentators aren't sure if this is the same event that Mark is talking about in Mark 16:12, and as you know, for Holy Week, we worked our way through the Gospel of Mark towards the Passion Week. And nevertheless, last week I addressed the issues with you with the last part of Mark chapter 16. So we're going to go to Luke's, because in Mark it's just one verse anyway, but we're going to use Luke's account today. And Luke, we know that it is this Easter day because every one of the Gospels that tells the story says that very day. We know he's talking about the resurrection. Some assume that the ladies going to the tomb was very early in the morning. I think John even says that. And that this is still, when this story starts, is still very early in the morning of Easter. As I read through it, I don't think that that's necessary, that it be early in the morning, could be midday, afternoon, whatever. But what we do know is that it takes us through the rest of the day. So let's be flexible with that. Think about it. It could be very, very early in the morning when this happens, taking the rest of the day, or they can pick it up later in the day. So I want to familiarize us with this text, Luke chapter 24, verse 13. It says, "Now that same day, two of them were on their way to a village called Emmaus, which was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. Together they were discussing everything that had taken place. And while they were discussing and arguing, Jesus himself came near and began to walk along with them. But they were prevented from recognizing him. Then he asked them, 'What is this dispute that you're having with each other as you're walking?' And they stopped walking and looked discouraged. The one named Cleopas answered him, 'Are you the only visitor in Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that happened there in these days?' 'What things?' he asked them. So they said to him, 'The things concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, powerful in action and speech before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we were hoping that he was the one who was about to redeem Israel. Besides all this, it's the third day since these things happened. Moreover, some women from our group astounded us. They arrived early at the tomb, and when they didn't find his body, they came and reported that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they didn't see him.' He said to them," Jesus, "How foolish you are and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Wasn't it necessary for the Messiah to suffer these things and enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted for them the things concerning himself and all the scriptures. Verse 28, "They came near the village where they were going, and he gave the impression that he was going farther. But they urged him, 'Stay with us, because it's almost evening, and now the day is almost over.' So he went in to stay with them. It was as he reclined at the table with them that he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, but he disappeared from their sight. They said to each other, 'Weren't our hearts burning within us while he was talking with us on the road and explaining the scriptures to us?' That very hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem. They found the 11 and those with them gathered together, who said, 'The Lord has truly been raised and has appeared to Simon.' Then they began to describe what had happened on the road and how he was made known to them in the breaking of the bread." You've probably heard that story. It's not one of the ones that we usually talk about on Easter, but I wanted just to ask a lot of questions as we go through this, because that's what I found myself doing as I was going through this. And there's some interesting things. We know that they're on a village that's 7 miles away, and I think scholars still today don't know where it is. We know that there are two individuals. One of them is named Cleopas. It has been suggested that the other was his wife. However, the Greek pronouns that they use make us think it's more than likely it's two men. And it says in the text that they were discussing and arguing. Now when you first come to this, you wonder what is it they're discussing and arguing about, but they make clear to Jesus what it was. Clearly there was a disagreement about what had happened and who to believe. So we know from the passages here in verses 19 to 21 that they had heard the story about the women and the empty tomb, and now they're trying to confirm it for themselves. What is it that we need to believe? What is actually true here? And we talked again last week about the validity of a woman's testimony in court. There was none. She was not allowed to testify in court as a witness. So they're probably deciphering for themselves how much of this story that they want to believe. And it says the important thing to notice here is we'd think in Jesus' resurrected body, although Mary, keep in mind, Mary made the mistake of mistaking Jesus as the gardener, but it says they were prevented from recognizing him. So the question to me is, on this resurrection day, what prevented you from recognizing this Jesus? Well, we really, as we go through the text, it was more than likely it was the power of Jesus had stopped them because he had other things at hand. He wanted, what we see here, what happened in verse 31, he was not revealing himself to this woman because he wanted them not to know that until later. So think about this for a second. On this most powerful, joyful day that we still celebrate thousands of years later, the day of the resurrection, they were so overwhelmed and confused, distraught by circumstances they had experienced. They were trying to process all this information and find out what is true. But in that moment, they are in the very presence of Jesus, and they are prevented from seeing him. And this is really the main thing that I wanted us to note today. In the midst of our and of your circumstance, Jesus can be walking right beside you, and you are prevented from recognizing him. Now, in this case, we'll give Jesus a supernatural credit for blinding their eyes in a way. But I think that can also be true for us, even when Jesus is not hindering us from seeing him. Sometimes we're blinded by our circumstances. Verse 17, once Jesus arrives, and it says, they stopped walking and looked discouraged. After he says, what is this dispute that you're having? Another version says their faces were downcast or still looking sad. And this thought, there's a lot we could dig into there, but think about this. They're saddened over the loss of the Messiah. This makes me think they were true followers of Jesus who loved him and had obeyed his teachings, and now they're distraught about his death and burial, and have heard a story of his resurrection, but they're discouraged. And Jesus appears, think about this, in the midst of their discouragement and sadness. As I was thinking through this passage this week, this phrase from a song kept coming to my mind, why should I be discouraged? So I looked it up. The song is His Eyes on the Sparrow, and I thought about putting that in our worship today, but I couldn't quite remember how the verses go. I'll send this to you in a link with an email later. But that's an encouraging thing. Why should I be discouraged when Jesus is right there beside me? And in verse 18 it says, this is my favorite part of the whole thing, verses 18 and 19. The one named Cleopas answered him, are you the only visitor in Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that happened there in these days? He's like, where have you been, man? Haven't you, we just finished the week of Passover, and haven't you seen what's going on? And Jesus could have rightly said, well, I've been overthrowing sin and death. I've been kind of busy. But he doesn't say that. He doesn't reveal himself to them yet. And he says, in English, it's in 2 words. I don't know how many it is in the Greek. He says, what things? He asks them. Now, tell me that Jesus doesn't have a sense of humor. Certainly he asks us in a facetious manner. He's the one who just conquered death and the grave, rose from the tomb, and he's going, what things? And I think, how hard must it have been for Jesus not to tell them who he is in that moment? But instead he plays foolish and says, what things? What are you talking about? And he just wants to know what they're going to say. So then it goes into the next verses. They begin to tell him all the things that they've heard about Jesus, how he was handed over to the leaders and sentenced to death, and they crucified him. And verse 21 is interesting. It says, but we were hoping that he was the one who was about to redeem Israel. They're still not convinced about the resurrection, are they, at this point? It says, we were hoping, but we heard this story. It may be true, it might not be. And then in verse 22, some of the women came. They astounded us. They said, his body isn't there. And they came and reported angels. And some of us went to the tomb just as one, but we didn't see him either. So now we're really trying to figure out what's going on. And Jesus says, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. I find that to be true of myself on many occasions when my own things that I say that I believe, when it comes to it, when the rubber meets the road, Do you really believe that? We're in one of those moments now in our time when we've been preaching. I know I've been preaching it to our congregation for years, preparation for when the American church doesn't exist as it did. And it may never be back to the way it was. So now we're in this place where, okay, what is the church going to be moving forward? Are we able to be flexible and adapt and still move forward on our mission of sharing the gospel with the world? It's in those times as these two guys are experiencing when we realize that what we believe, how intently do we believe that? And then it says in verse 27 that Jesus began to explain. I have to read this sentence. Beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted for them the things concerning himself in all the scriptures. Talk about what a Bible study that must have been. Can you imagine a more powerful witness than the very person who is the central figure these prophecies from the Old Testament are prophesying about? That is the very person who's teaching you these things, and he's standing right in front of you. And I love the part where it says, he interpreted for them the things concerning himself in all the scriptures. What an amazing thing that must have been to spend Jesus' resurrection day with him and have him explain the scriptures to you. But think about this. We only know one of these guys' names. Tradition says his name, church tradition says his name was Simon, and he was one of the 70 that Jesus sent ahead of him in Luke chapter 10. But Jesus didn't spend the majority of his day with his disciples. In fact, this whole day is going to pass. Mary and some of the women had seen him in the morning, saw the empty tomb anyway. But Jesus doesn't go to his disciples. He is just on the road explaining scriptures to two unknown, unnamed individuals. Interesting, one of the things that he talked about was suffering. He said the Messiah had to suffer these things. Wouldn't you have loved to hear Jesus explain the meaning of suffering from the whole entire Old Testament? What an amazing day that must have been. Verse 28, they come to this village. He gives the impression he's going on farther. He's going to go to Galilee. He prophesied and told the angel, said, go ahead, go to Galilee. He's going to meet you there like he said he would. But they urged him, stay with us because it's almost evening. And now the day is almost over, so he went in to stay with them. It doesn't take, in the very first verse 13, it said it's 7 miles to Emmaus. It doesn't take a whole day to walk these 7 miles. And I'm sure they covered the miles much more quicker than we would nowadays. They walked everywhere. It would take perhaps 2 or 3 hours. If you're walking 3 miles an hour, it takes you a little more than 2 hours. So this whole day, it says, is almost evening. So think about this amazing 7-mile full day walk, and perhaps they stopped and discussed and sat on and just discussed with Jesus and had questions about as he's teaching. And perhaps the insight of Jesus' teaching and the depth of it has delayed and slowed their trip. Them asking him to stay is not only a matter of cultural courtesy, but certainly they don't want this guy to leave. And they still don't even know who he is yet. Then verse 30, so he goes in to stay with them, and he reclines at the table. They break bread, and he gives it to them. And in this moment, it says their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, but he disappeared from their sight. I want to know, what was the time frame on this? Is in the instant they recognized him, then is he gone? Is there a couple minutes that passes in between there? We don't really know from the text. But then what's interesting is the conversation they have with each other then. Weren't our hearts burning within us while he was talking with us and explaining the scriptures? I would assume they probably were. And they're almost saying to each other, I knew it. I thought so. I almost said something to you that there was something different about him. But their belief is not strong enough to confirm what their hearts are telling them. How often do we not listen to the burning in our own hearts? And it's just a reminder to us that a lot of times we are so led by information and education and things that we know and can experience and feel that we're not often enough listening to the Spirit of God. So I would challenge you with that also this morning. That sometimes the burning in our hearts, I love the way that it's described there. Sometimes there's a burning in your heart is the thing that you need to listen to. And I kind of talked about that a little bit on Friday in our Facebook Live. But it says, then they got up and they returned to Jerusalem. It says that very hour. So they have come to this place to rest for the night. Who knows what time it is. But now the message that they have is so important. it doesn't matter how far it is, we're going to go on to Galilee. So they go there, I'm assuming it's to Galilee, and they're testifying that what the women saw and said, we have now seen. And it reminded me of the shepherds in Luke chapter 2 at Jesus' birth when they run into the city of Bethlehem and tell everything that they had seen. But now there's no more discussion, no more arguing. It is indisputable. Not only have we seen him, but he explained the scriptures to us. They're not sleeping now. It's not time to go to sleep. We have seen and heard this event for ourselves. We have been with him, and he explained the scriptures to us. So not only have the women testified to it, now these two have as well. I'm assuming the disciples would have known them. So when they show up, it's just another confirming story. And it's my prayer today that our testimony would be similar to theirs. That we could experience Jesus that is walking right next to us. And that he will unfold the scriptures to us. It's my prayer that he will comfort you so that you can sing, "It is well with my soul." And I want to sing that for us now as we close this morning. And I want this to kind of process this story through today and think about what it would have been like to have been one of those two. That would have been the greatest Bible lesson ever taught. What an amazing thing it would have been to be there. And I'm certainly after that day they were able to sing, "It is well with my soul." When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. Though Satan should buffet, though trials should